Perfect. So, my name is Patrick, and I'll be presenting today on detecting tool-target anatomy interactions in laparoscopic surgery. So, an overview, I'll be giving an introduction, background, methodology, analysis of results, and conclusion. And I just want to give a content warning that due to the nature of my project, I'll be presenting on images of laparoscopic surgery. So, in order to demonstrate data sets and also visualizing the results of experiments. So I put a caution symbol at the bottom right-hand corner of every slide that prefaces another slide of surgery. Okay. Okay, so for my introduction, surgery has become a crucial component to the healthcare system with over 310 million surgeries performed in 2020. And the adverse event rate occurring in major surgical procedures remained between 13 to 24% in the United States. The use of laparoscope and the use of a laparoscope in surgery is a camera that is inserted into the abdomen via a small incision, a sub-centimeter incision, and is inserted into the abdomen to get footage of surgery that is happening inside of the body without having to perform open surgery. So the introduction of fiber optics, such as the laparoscope, minimizes the invasiveness of surgeries that would have otherwise required a large incision and open surgery. So for human activity recognition, to segment into this, because my work will be focusing on identifying interactions in laparoscopic footage. Human activity recognition takes interest in developing deep learning models that classify interactions between said person and object. And though it's not quite similar or not quite the exact way I'll be implementing this, it's a similar concept. As you can see in this figure, there is a little kid riding a bike. He's holding onto the bike, he's riding it, sitting on it. And as you can see, there are negative marks for walking or washing. So something like that will be similar to how I present my data in this thesis. And action triplets are a proposed method for organizing necessary information by frame to manage identifying humans, objects, and actions. And this is especially helpful in a surgical context because is a very neat way to present the data and be able to identify components. So for action triplets and data sets, this is the standard of what they look like in other research labs and how the data is presented. And previous work in recognizing human activity has been modeled with action triplets, as I just mentioned, the human verb and object to manage the responsibility of identifying components in a frame. However, in surgical applications, the interactions identified in these endoscopic videos are modeled as surgical action triplets. So that would be the instrument verb that is being performed by the instrument on the target anatomy. So as you can see in these images, there's in the leftmost image, there's an irrigator aspirating fluid. So along with that, you can see that there's more concrete examples like the hook dissecting the bladder and the grasper retracting. So studying action triplet recognition requires these images to be annotated with the triplet components. So these are the annotations, this like little bracket with the listed verbs. So then that is also fed into the model for classification. So for the specific aims of my project, I want to create a deep learning network that is able to process video frames from laparoscopic surgery and localize the background, target anatomy, tools, and the overlap between these two classes. And now for the background. And to cover more deeply what is happening with the surgical action triplet classification, there have been challenges in identifying verbs and targets in images, since images are often instrument centric and not many visual cues of what the instrument is doing in the image can be seen. So I also want to make clear that these boxes around the instruments are not part of the data set that we pulled from, and something we had to do separately, but very similar concept to what I just showed. However, as you can see in table 3 from other papers, there have been it is quite difficult, and the average precision for identifying the instrument and verbs together, or instrument and targets, it progressively gets worse. However, this author was able to achieve around a 35% identification rate for, or average precision for identifying these components. And this is just necessary to lay the groundwork for what's coming next. And yeah, so for segmenting images, the UNet architecture was created for the purpose of a network and training strategy that relies on strong use of data augmentation. So to use the available annotated samples more efficiently. And this is helpful because, especially in the context of surgical data science, we do not have a lot of images to work with to begin with. It's quite difficult to obtain images of surgery due to HIPAA as a part of a concern, and also the availability of these tools in other hospitals, or even being able to share the data. And for that reason, our data set isn't as large as most other convolutional neural networks use to actually segment images. So this architecture is proposed to actually be able to segment biomedical images more efficiently, and also in low light settings, like you'll see in these images. So for the methodology and experiments, and a fair warning, I think like 3 of these images back to back contain surgery, so I'll let you know when that's over. But yeah, so for the actual data set that we pulled from was a Cholec T50, and we found that through another author's paper, and we were able to download the images along with the some type of CSV containing the actual the triplet components in there. So there are about 50 videos of laparoscopic cholecystectomy annotated with binary presence of action triplets. So legitimately just like, is grasper there? Yes, no, like 0, 1. And each video is recorded at 1 frame per second, and there are about 100,000 frames and about 161,000 triplet instance labels over the entire data set. And the triplet labels were provided with labels for each component with the binary presence. And these boxes were not included, just to make sure that that's known. We had to do that separately. And yeah, show what's next. So in the Picasso lab, there were a team of individuals that were able to actually annotate the images. So each of those little orange boxes are instances or clicks drawing a polygon around the target itself. And that polygon was then processed as into a segmentation mask that I created. So that's for the target anatomy, and then for the actual instruments, a bounding box was created, and that bounding box was also translated over to a segmentation mask. So 720 images were annotated using the convention I just mentioned, and there was also a verb tag included for each instrument that was annotated. So along with these polygons and bounding boxes, there was also a tag for target, instrument, and verb. And 484 of these images were included in the analysis due to the nature that some of the images weren't able to be processed, or it just made the data worse. So, and the segmentation mask shows an overlap. As you can see here, this is an instrument, the lighter gray, and this darker gray is the target anatomy, and then these white boxes are edging the target and the instrument are the actual the overlap that was separated into its own class. Okay. So the overall model architecture that I'm proposing is a segmentation model and multi-label classifier run in parallel. And as you can see, the output from the segmentation model is just a similar mask to what I just showed you. And for the multi-label classifier, it's the output labels and seeing how well that matches. So there will be a tools present and the actual prediction. So for the segmentation mask, the following architecture was used for the segmentation model. It was a UNet architecture with 3-channel RGB input. So the images were fed in as the color, and there was a ResNet 34 encoder with ImageNet pre-weighted encoders and 4 classes. So those 4 classes would be the background, the target anatomy, the instrument, and the overlap between instruments and target anatomy. And as for the multi-label image classification, I was able to pull from a pre-trained model in transfer learning for UNet or ImageNet. And the transfer learning models are used to train in the context of a large general classification class. And then those tasks are then used to address more specific tasks later. So distinguishing between a grasper and a hook, for example, and yeah, extracting meaningful features that were previously learned. And then for the evaluation metrics, the UNet architecture used dice loss, which is basically measuring the boundary for the segmentation mask created and seeing how well that fits. And the evaluation metrics were the dice coefficient, the mean precision average, and the mean intersection over union. And these were used to propose a wide array of results and be able to interpret the data more clearly. And for the multi-label image classifier, the loss function that was used was the binary cross entropy loss, which basically measured the negative likelihood of the predicted class being present. And the evaluation metric was a macro F1 score, which basically used precision and recall, as you can see in here, and use that to create a evaluation metric, the F1 score, by multiplying recall and precision by 2, and then over the sum of them. So for the analysis of results, the distribution of tools present in the data is as follows. There are 462 graspers, 306 hooks, 30 clippers, 22 bipolars, 14 scissors, and 5 irrigators. And as you can see, there is a bit of class imbalance, but this is just due to the data that was available. So as difficult as it is to get videos of surgery, it's even more difficult to specify what tools you want present in the surgery. So it just fell this way, but I will talk about that later as well. So for the evaluation of multi-label image classifiers, the F1 score for each instrument is shown and is demonstrating a correlation between the frequency of the tool in the data set and the maximum F1 score that was achieved, which was measured to be 0.99. Along with the F1 scores, we'll also demonstrate the precision recall curves. So as you can see, the grasper performed very well compared to the other tools present in this model. And there was quite a bit of difficulty distinguishing between hooks and bipolars. So the hook was present in the data a lot more. So a lot more predictions fell under hook, which caused the bipolar score to be even lower. But yeah, these are basically the class imbalance contributed to this because, as you can see, the without much representation in the training, the model doesn't predict these as often, and the F1 score drops significantly. It affects the recall. So, and then for the precision recall curves, it shows the relationship between precision and recall and how they achieved a maximum F1 score around the 0.7 threshold for labels, for the hook, and then the same thing about for the grasper. And for the visualization of multi-label image classifiers, so this was an image or an example of the output. You can see that usually if a bipolar was even guessed, the hook was also going to be guessed as well. So this was some of the issues I ran into with actually being able to use the multi-label image classifier with this data set. However, it was accurately predicting the grasper very well, and the hook is when it was present. And for the evaluation of segmentation, these scores provide a story for the segmentation of laparoscopic footage. So the dice score and mean intersection over union take class imbalance into account. So for this, I mean, the background takes up a large portion of the image. As you can see, most of it was black for some of these images, which means that the background took up the majority of the space and the majority of the pixels as well. So that would lead to a higher mean average precision naturally, and even if we were to guess a completely black screen. So taking that into account, I also wanted to use the dice score and the mean intersection over union to demonstrate that across all classes, it still performed fairly well. Yeah, and there was not much variation between tests as well. So that was something that worked well. That being said, for the dice score, it also can be pretty catastrophic for smaller classes. For example, if one pixel is off for the overlap, which was a very small class, that would have a much more catastrophic effect on the actual score when comparing that to the dice score for the background, for example. So yeah. And for the visualization of the UNet, this is what the actual overall results looked like as well. I wanted to include some good examples that I had and a not so good one, just to show what the data actually looked like and what my model was outputting. So especially for images where you can very clearly tell where the color changes for the anatomy that was annotated, and the tooltip very easily being seen, it performed very well. As you can see, the tooltips were very, it was pretty easy for the model to recognize it. However, some of the anatomy got lost in translation about here. Yeah, so that was just, so yeah, the ground truth segmentation is what it actually is. And then the model segmentation is just showing what the model predicted would be. So these two are instruments. This is the target anatomy, and then this is the overlap. So it kind of worked well over here, but sometimes it got lost over here. Yeah. So moving on. Conclusion. For limitations, the data set was ultimately used for image. The data set that was ultimately used for image classification did not include verbs or targets, as it was out of the scope for this project. It performed pretty poorly for other models, so we wanted to focus on actually getting the tools recognized, which also proposed a bit of challenge with some of the class imbalance. However, also did not distinguish between actual tool-target interaction and cases where the tools hover over the target in frame. So we didn't have much footage of just tools being present without actually doing something, which is something that would help with the model actually being able to tell whether the tool is just in the frame doing nothing, or if it's actually a grasper grasping the gallbladder, for example. Okay. So then for conclusions, the contributions of this thesis are as follows. I achieved the segmentation of tools and target structures and images of laparoscopic surgery, and classified tools present in images of laparoscopic surgery. And I demonstrated the feasibility of taking single task approach to inferring tool/tissue interactions using parallel models. And for future directions, the newer methods could help potentially understand the scene more holistically by identifying more components of the action triplet in frame. And this has pointed us to a new line of investigation for this problem and the need to develop this model as an end-to-end network. And I would personally like to thank my advisors, Dr. Hashimoto and Dr. Eaton, for their help throughout the semester and taking the time to guide me through this thesis, especially Dr. Hashimoto being here today and meeting with me throughout the whole semester, despite his very busy schedule, along with Dr. Eaton. And I would like to thank the Picasso Lab, Friha, Shruti, Vivek, Shubha, and Matyaj for being there to bounce ideas off of and encouraging me, and all of my families and friends present for this presentation. So, yeah. Thank you.
Great. Let's give Patrick a round of applause. And at this point, I'm going to open the floor for questions from the audience. Feel free to unmute or type your questions in the chat. So if there are no questions, Patrick, I have a question for you. So how do we know? So I'm not a computer vision person, as you know, but so I'm going to ask a very naive question. So how do you know how sort of traditional template matching would necessarily compare to these sort of deep learning techniques if you're trying to identify like what tools you have in the image?
Having considered sorry, can you repeat the last half of that question?
Yeah, so I'm just kind of wondering, like, if you did like straight old school template matching, right? So you would have views of the different tools and of course different orientations, and then you're saying, well, let me figure out, which of these tools is which, right? So this is kind of what I understand of old school template matching. How do you think that's going to compare, with the deep learning methods that you have?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in terms of actually using template matching instead of the tool or the models that I proposed, I think that the models would most likely work better just because of being able to use spatial information along with the image classifiers. So the goal is to bring these two together in one network, but being able to classify both the location and the presence of these things. But in terms of using the actual the method you proposed, that could work in addition to the UNet. That's something to consider as well too.
And then I have another question.
Yes.
Again, because I'm not a vision person, so I cheat whenever I have to solve a vision problem. Is there any sense, so do you know if people, because one thing you could do is just color the tools differently, right? So each tool would have some kind of a marking that would, graspers only get this marking versus hooks only get that marking. Is there a sense of whether that's feasible or not? I mean, obviously that requires the people making these things to commit to that, but is there a sense of that?
That is a good question. I think in terms of actually bringing it to the operating room, I think that would pose challenges just to be able to have that as a standard across all hospitals that collect this data. That being said, though, maybe applying like a color filter to the images that are fed into the model as inputs could work as well, instead of actually having to change the color of the instrument.
Okay. I'm just curious. There's only so many companies making these things. At least that's my understanding.
That's true.
Okay. So other questions from the audience? Okay, so if there are no more questions, I would like to thank our presenters one more time. Thank you guys so much. And, these have been wonderful presentations. Good luck with, all your, end of summer endeavors and beyond. And please stay in touch. Let's give Patrick one last round of applause. We'll give our presenters, all our presenters, one last round of applause.